Welcome back, viewers. Just kidding. Hi. I don't know if other photographers have ever thought about it, but I certainly have. What kind of photographer am I? And if the mention of you being a photographer comes up in conversation, for me at least, it's generally followed by what kind of photographer are you, or what kind of photos do you take? Which, what am I supposed to say? Ones that I hope don't look like absolute ass. It's like asking somebody with tattoos, what does that tattoo mean? It means whatever the fuck I want it to mean. Or it doesn't have to mean anything. It can just be a tattoo. I like taking pictures of lots of things. I can just be a photographer. I think. Despite having photographed dozens and dozens of weddings since 2007, I've known that I've never wanted to be or be known as a wedding photographer. Weddings are a shitload of work, and I've done too many weddings in dark hotel ballrooms that rob me of any creative expression. So, if what you're doing isn't making you happy, stop doing it. Easier said than done. So I did. Several years ago, I told myself that if I were to take on any weddings in the future, it would have to be for somebody I know, or it would have to be somewhere really cool. Somewhere that would afford me as a photographer a little more creative wiggle room than some dark-ass hotel. Both of those just happened to hit me 8 days apart this summer. Ben and Anna's wedding on Mount Rainier and Paige and Ross's wedding on Whidbey Island. So, shoot a wedding on Mount Rainier, and then in those 8 days in between, drive from Rainier to Linwood to see my dad, Linwood to Missoula to see my mom, Missoula to Whidbey Island to see my brother, shoot a wedding, fly back to Dallas. Let's go back north. Anytime I get to go back to where I'm from, it's always euphoric. I've lived in Texas for too long, and I miss the cold, and I miss the gray, the rain, actual seasons, evergreen trees, mountains, water. But when I've got 2 weddings to shoot in a week's time, I don't want those things because I know I can't have them all at once. So just a happy medium would be enough. When I flew into SeaTac, there wasn't a cloud in the sky. So got my rental car, put my playlist on, rolled my windows down, just drove. I'd realized that even though I'd spent my first 22 years of life in Washington, I'd only been to Rainier once that I could recall, which was like 2 years ago. And it was foggy and I couldn't see shit. So I was getting to experience this place for the first time. And of course, being in the car alone meant that I could pull over wherever and whenever I want to, guilt-free. Got to the lodge, met Ben and Anna, and after dinner, we hiked up to scout the location for the ceremony the next morning. And goddamn, it was so pretty. The plan was I would meet each of them around 5:30 in the morning, shoot them getting ready, and then we hike up around 6:30 for the ceremony before everybody and their mother decided to enjoy this gorgeous weather. I mean, I hadn't felt temperatures like this since February, so I slept with the window wide open. It was heaven. When I woke up, I could see right out the window, and it took me a moment to process what I was seeing, which was not a fucking thing. Absolutely nothing. As it can be, there was a wedding day hope that this heavy fog that appeared out of nowhere would burn off. So what was supposed to be the pre-sunrise hike up Rainier slowly shifted to a it'll burn off pause. No wind, and the higher we hiked to the ceremony location, the fog just turned into a heavy mist. Never burned off, at least in time for the ceremony. We wandered around, took some portraits, but we were really trying to kill time in the hopes that the fog would burn off and the mountain would reveal itself. And after hours of just that, we went back to the campsite, hung out for a while. But by about 8 o'clock that night, it was time for me to make the 3-hour drive back to my dad's. The second I made it out to the road, just as the sun set, I turned back, and there it was. Rainier and not a goddamn cloud in the sky. Sorry, Ben and Anna. It's always a challenge to make the absolute most out of a trip back home. I never feel like I'm able to. My dad and brother live in Washington, and my mom and sisters live in Montana. Then there's always a few friends who I don't get to see enough. And then there's the selfish shit I want to do, like go places and take pictures. Friends and family have their own lives and their own schedules, and not everyone has the freedom or willingness to drop everything they're doing to cater to my schedule when I'm home. So sometimes when I get back, I can't see everybody that I want to. There's just not enough time in the day to make it work. And it does always end up making me feel guilty. Sometimes it feels like it would be better to just not tell anybody I'm coming and then just see what works and what doesn't. But I generally try to have a conscience, and sometimes it works out. One of my best friends had a kid years ago, and the last time I saw him, I couldn't meet his son because I showed up at nap time. Weird, too old for naps now. Are you going to take him home? It's a real trip to see my friends now starting families. We're all now starting to turn 40, and they've all got little kids. Mine graduates high school in May. I'm certainly not starting over just to have that feeling again, that feeling of having a little person around that I admittedly miss so much. But if I'm not starting over, then what the fuck am I going to do? I wonder if this is how my midlife crisis starts. This was supposed to be that little sliver of a day that I do that selfish shit. Drive somewhere and take photos. And even though I was born and raised in Washington, it's a big place, and there's still plenty of it I've never seen, like the North Cascades Highway. In the wintertime, they close the highway. So the only time you can really drive it is not in the winter. Problem was wildfires. Road was closed. I was leaving for Montana the following day. So whatever I could do had to be relatively close to my dad's. So I just drove, and I ended up in Bellingham. And for film photographers, have you ever gotten your film back and just thought, what the fuck was I thinking? Half the film on this trip is absolute shit. Maybe that's what kind of photographer I am. A shit one. I got into a kick of shooting everything at box speed, and it all looks like ass. Nothing looks good. Maybe come next year, I'll just shoot black and white forever. So anyway, on the way to Bellingham, I took a road that I'd never been on, and I saw something that I'd never seen. After a dusty drive up to this little hill, there was a tiny clearing that looked out over the entire north end of Puget Sound, and people were jumping off of it. Watching one after another wrangle their chutes in the wind, the breeze died for a moment and it left one guy stranded. I had realized that I had just taken my last frame on this roll, and all my film was in the rental car about a half mile back up the road. I'm not the biggest fan of approaching a stranger for a portrait, but it was already awkward enough, me sitting there watch this guy struggle, and him watching me watching him. So I ran back, got a new roll, ran back, and he was still stuck, so I asked for a portrait. He obliged, and he took off. It's an 8-hour drive from my dad's to my mom's across Washington and Idaho into western Montana. As soon as I got out of traffic, gassed up and over the mountains, Took a pit stop in Vantage to stretch the old legs. I love Montana. I've been numerous times to visit my mom since she moved out there, and I've always wanted to go back and revisit Glacier National Park. The only time I've ever made it to Glacier was in 2016. Just me and Ethan. And it was incredible. So I got a reservation and had planned on getting up at like 3 a.m. to drive 3 hours north of my mom's on one of the days I'd be out here so I could see the sunrise in Glacier. That was the plan. My mom and Mark had set up a campsite for me, which beats the hell out of some random hotel. It's almost like being a kid again. This is exactly how we would do it when I was young. Although I never got the camper, I got the tent that somehow already had mosquitoes in it and some thin-ass sleeping bag. But at least this way, we could all just relax and enjoy everything without being stuck inside. And when you do it like this, it's like you get your own little private Montana. Woke up the next morning to rain. Silver lining was that hopefully all the wildfire smoke would be gone. So I was only going to be able to be in Montana for 3-ish days, and then I'd have to make the drive back for my friend's wedding on the island. I hadn't seen my sister and nephews in years, hadn't seen my mom in almost 2. So me wanting to take an entire day away from what little time I had with them to go to Glacier by myself, it was weighing on me. That, coupled with the fact that the wildfires were so bad that you couldn't see the mountains around Missoula, I didn't really care to gamble on 6 hours round trip in the car to get to Glacier and not see shit, especially without Ethan there. So I gave up Glacier and we went for a drive over the Sapphire Mountains. Just a lonely, narrow dirt road you probably wouldn't want to break down on. The silver lining to just taking a drive is you stumble upon places that you otherwise would never have. Like this little meadow. If I lived in Montana, I'd be up here all the time. Made it down out of the mountains past these mountain cows, and you're in the middle of nowhere. This is it. This is what it looks like. There's literally nothing out here. And of course, because we're in the middle of nowhere, I'm going a little over the speed limit, and I see a truck way off in the distance, and it pulls over. And I know immediately. So I pull over. It turns around. Officer walks up. Yes, I know why you pulled me over. She takes my license back to her truck, and my mom says, you should ask to take her picture. I'm like, absolutely not. Please don't say a word. Officer comes back, tells me my registration is expired. And then my mom chimes in from the passenger seat. My son makes YouTube videos and he wants to take your picture. And naturally, the officer was like, no, slow down. Much of rural Montana, while it is beautiful, there's not a lot there, like this town. There's a cool candy shop, but the only reason you'd probably spend the time to drive here is for a bag of dirt. And in that bag of dirt are sapphires. It's a bit of a pain in the ass if you don't have panning equipment, but you use what you've got. You keep your beer and your bourbon full, and your fingers crossed. Sapphires. You can't spend all your time parked around the campsite. Sometimes you just need to take a drive down the road. And while it's not Glacier National Park, it was an hour in the car with my mom. You never really feel like you spent enough time. Certainly not as much time as you wish you could. And it was time to drive 8 hours back to Washington. I had a wedding the next day. I heard this anecdote a while ago about time. And since then, it's sort of been ever present. Basically, and I'm going to paraphrase, we only have so many more visits with our parents. You graduate high school, maybe go off to college, move to a different city, start your life, right? And then if you're lucky, you get to go home twice a year. Once in the summer, maybe once for the holidays. But by this point, maybe your parents are 60, probably older. So do the math and hope for the best. The average life expectancy in the United States is 76 years old. So let's just say they make it to 80, 20 years. That's it. You only have 40 more visits with your parents. If you go home twice a year, you only get to see them and spend time with them 40 more times. Every time you go home. Check it off the list. I needed a break, but I had a schedule to keep. I stopped at the same place on the way back, this overlook above the Columbia River in the little town of Vantage. It's one of those places that I feel compelled to stop at every time I'm on this long, lonesome stretch of I-90. And like a few other places I have scattered around the United States, I shoot the exact same thing every single time. The only variables are the stock I decided to bring with me, the time of day I happen to be there, and the weather. It's ever changing. It wasn't the same as it was 3 days ago, let alone 5 years ago. When I when I was a kid, so many of my friends hated living on the island. They referred to it as the Rock, like it was some prison they couldn't escape. I left, and yeah, I wish I could return, but almost all my family is now gone from it. My brother's the only one left, and he just moved back a couple years ago. To me, Whidbey Island is the perfect place. But even the perfect place will still have its fair share of people who will choose to piss and moan about something they don't like about it, like the ferry line. Got off the ferry, went straight to the rehearsal. The following day was way too early for a wedding, but it was a very good day. The next morning, I left my brother's, but I didn't really want to leave the island just yet. So I killed as much time as I could, just sort of aimlessly wandering around downtown Langley, waiting for the wine shop to open, which was apparently whenever the fuck you feel like showing up. Then I ended at what used to be my old middle school. I get it, people's complaints. Unless you happen to have a decent job on the island or you work remote, there aren't very many opportunities unless you commute on the ferry. And that right there is at least an hour minimum out of your day. And it's not cheap. So people move to the mainland. But when so many people leave, everything else ends up becoming collateral damage in the wake of opportunity. This school, my middle school, was actually my grandparents' entire school, K through 12. When I was going to school here, I'd walk down the main hall and look up and see their pictures on the wall with their graduating classes. 1955 for Cliff Schumacher and 1958 for Billy Mazzal. Here I was in 8th grade, 40 years later, walking the same creaky wood floors. I have so many memories of this place. Wall ball, my favorite art class, the teachers, school dances. When I was 21, I even taught 7th and 8th grade girls basketball in this gym. but it's all but been abandoned, overgrown, rusting away. There simply aren't enough kids on the south end of the island anymore to justify its use. No kids, no money. I'd move back if I could, but I'm too goddamn old to be adding to the population anymore.
Wave.